Good evening, and welcome to New Foundation Unity. This is our sixth and final class in this series on the faculty of judgment. We will be starting up again in a few weeks, so you can check the website for the information, either Mark's website at truthunity.net or mine at newfoundationunity.org. If you have any difficulties either in hearing or viewing, call Mark, or email Mark rather, at truthunity.net. Later on, you may call in 816-301-6304. We're going to finish up Samuel tonight and then have a survey of all the judges and see what lessons we can derive from them. So as we begin our time together, I invite you to close your eyes, become still, and know that you are always in the presence of God. Your name is always being called. For we are all called into God's service. It is from the silence of our being that we receive, through the still small voice, the wisdom that guides and directs us every step of the way. And for a few moments in the silence, let us rest in that awareness of the still small voice in the silence. And as we begin to return our attention to this time and this place, we give thanks for that special birth that is taking place within us. That birth that fulfills God's vision for each one of us. And so we give thanks for an awareness of that Christ that is beginning to emerge in our awareness. And we do give thanks in the name and through the power of that living, loving Christ presence that lives within us all. Amen. So last week, starting in the first book of Samuel, we discussed how Samuel was born in answer to prayer. Everyone has Hannah, the soul of Hannah within, that longs for that Christ to come forth. Everyone wants to be seen for that Christ presence. And so we acknowledge that we are all on that same path of giving birth to a new state of consciousness, and that there are challenges along the way in these various forms of human limitation. With Samuel, it's the Philistines still. We've had all the various tribes, different facets, different aspects of human consciousness that are stumbling blocks, but we have what it takes inside to overcome these challenges. And so Eli, once she convinces Eli that her prayer is for a son, she is reassured that her request will be granted. Like we need sometimes the confirmation of the intellect to say, oh yeah, you're not drunk or crazy. That is really, that desire is going to be fulfilled. So Samuel is born, and his name, heard of God. God is heard. And Samuel is in the temple. He sleeps where the Ark of the Covenant is. He's asleep. And sometimes it takes at least 3 times for us to acknowledge that still small voice. To wake up, we need 3 calls, and he thinks it's Eli. But the 4th time, Eli says, say, speak, thy servant heareth. Okay. So that's the important piece about his birth and his waking up to that essential nature that is within him. And when he asks for the Lord to speak, he hears the prophecy that he, Samuel, is going to take over as the high priest. And that the house, that is the consciousness of Eli, who has 2 worthless sons, is going to be wiped out. And he's afraid to tell Eli, except that Eli has already had that prophecy come to him because the people have complained about the corruption of his son. So we talked about that phase last time. Now here comes the battle of the Philistines. And the Israelites are losing badly. Remember that Philistines represent that consciousness that lives in and for materiality. The Israelites are losing badly, and so they decide that maybe they can bring in the Ark of the Covenant. They'll go get it from Shiloh. You see, the temple was not yet built, the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. And so they get the Ark of the Covenant, and Eli's sons are there with the Ark of the Covenant. And so the Israelites are defeated. The Ark is captured by the Philistines and taken to the temple of Dagon, who is half fish and half God. Half fish and half man. They are the Philistines, seafaring people that came from the Aegean region. Interesting. So, a good example of how we make God in our own image and likeness. And so, the ark, which represents that spark of divinity, that Christ, that seed of the Christ that has been with us in the beginning, it does the Philistines no good. And so they find all kinds of misfortunes are happening. Their god Dagon has fallen over and his limbs are broken, and they pass it around to all of the Philistine towns, and they decide to take it back, because all they've got are boils and tumors, and their god is not faring very well. So they take it back with a guilt offering, which is a golden image of those tumors and mice that they have been experiencing. So an elaborate ritual as a guilt offering. They realize they should not have done this. And so when the ark gets back, they put it in a safe place, and there it stays until it goes to Jerusalem under David. Okay, so what can we learn from this story? To send for the ark is symbolic of our asking for divine protection. But the protection is not with the symbol. We so often mistake the symbol for the reality. That box is a symbol of that divine essence, but it's not the divine essence. We have this situation quite often. Our religious institutions, which are symbols of the Christ, are not going to deliver us. Only going within, listening to the still small voice, that is where our deliverance comes. Okay. And so Samuel understands that. Then they have a meeting. He calls together. Samuel has the insight to call together the elders of Israel at Mizpah. Mizpah, it reminds me a little bit of the disciples sitting together in one place in the upper room. Here they are. Mizpah means high watch, watchtower. To stay centered in spiritual consciousness requires constant vigilance. And here's what he tells them, and this relates back to our cycle, our pattern. He says, return to Jehovah with all your heart. Serve Jehovah only. Put away the foreign gods. And be vigilant. That's what judgment is. It's being vigilant about what you take in and what you release. What serves my highest good and what does not. And so they mind Samuel, and the Philistines are defeated. And there's a reference to Mark 13:33, where Jesus is saying, "Take heed, watch, for you do not know when the time will come." Like a man going on a journey, he puts the servants in charge and the doorkeeper to keep the high watch. And it's like that. We're vigilant. And Samuel's message, it's really the same thing as H.B. Jeffrey, "Look unto me," that is Jehovah, "and be ye saved." That's the message from Samuel. And when we look away from those forces of materiality, we maintain the high watch, we are able to see God at work in various situations. So Samuel is successful in defeating the Philistines. He sets a rock, it's called the Rock of Help, Ebenezer, and it's placed between Mizpah, that's the watchtower that we were just talking about, and Shen, which is the integration of what has been gained in prayer. So we go in, we receive the wisdom and the direction, and then we go forth, and then we use it and we integrate it into our consciousness and bring that ideal Christ in that man into manifestation. Okay, well, in 1 Samuel 8, you will see here that Samuel is getting old. And the people come to him and they say, "You are old and we don't want your sons because they're corrupt. So please, can we have a king?" And Samuel finds this offensive, and he goes and prays about this. And by the way, the essence of prayer, it's not words, it is silence. And he hears from the Lord, listen to the people, give them what they want, and they will find out. He gives them a stern warning. What happens if you abdicate your power of choice to another? Think about if there have been times when you, out of thinking you don't know what to do, you ask everybody else and get a bunch of opinions. But sometimes people do turn decision-making power over to whoever their authority is. Maybe their parents, or maybe their teachers, or maybe their husband or wife, or a friend, or a teacher, who knows, a minister. But what happens is, and what the people say is, we want a king who will fight our battles for us. And really here we see what is unique about unity. What happens when you say, I'm just going to let you do it for us. I'll come to church every Sunday and I'll listen to what you have to say, but when I have challenges, I'm going to count on you to take care of it for me. How much growth do you think comes from that kind of decision? But that's what the people say. We want a king to fight our battles. And so the message is about the king. The king has to be anointed, has to be lifted up in awareness, because the king represents will. And Saul just happens to saunter by. He's looking for his white asses. And at first he is a very humble king. And he just sort of stops in to ask something of Samuel, and Samuel decides he's the one and anoints him to be king. Well, as it turns out, if you know the stories of the kings of Israel, you'll see that Saul never did completely rise out of that sense of personal will. He'd slip back all the time. And so if you have questions about Samuel, write them down or file them away for a while. And so when our will, which is the executive power, is inspired by that faculty of judgment, and it stays within the realm of human limitation, then we can find that there are blocks to our success. There's a very fine line between human consciousness and spiritual, or just a taste of spiritual consciousness, and we kind of go back and forth for a while until the spiritual consciousness is firmly there. Sometimes he consults soothsayers, and sometimes he consults Samuel, and so you can see that he's hedging his bets here. And so everything that we have within us that does not acknowledge God as the source has to go. And, it's a lifetime journey. Will has to be under divine guidance because it is God's executive power. All right, and then there's these Amalekites, another tribe that has to be dealt with, representing the subconscious, and that's where all those parts of human consciousness that are stubborn and do not want to go away, that's where they exist, in the realm of our subconscious. And they all have to go until they are lifted up, anointed as God's executives. Okay, so that's all we're going to do with Samuel. But again, I'd like to kind of revisit some of these judges, all of these judges, because each one has a kind of unique flavor of how spiritual discernment works in different cases. We started with Deborah. Deborah, the key phrases in Deborah, and I'm sure this is on your worksheets, the ones that you downloaded. The first key phrase of Deborah is that her name means discrimination, fine discrimination, like a bee, and she's sitting under a palm tree, meditating, accessing through her intuition the wisdom in how to overcome the Canaanites. And now the Canaanites, there's many of those Canaanites representing some aspect of limitation and human consciousness. But sitting under a palm tree refers to her meditation, which establishes her in a strong, steadfast kind of faith. And that, when we perceive the presence of God, which is invisible to the eyes, it awakens our intuitive judgment, which then bears fruit. Palm trees bear fruit, and we're talking about bearing fruit in an outer way. As far as Deborah and Barak are concerned, that's in chapter 4, verses 8 through 17. He represents that will. It's an unselfish will, a very enthusiastic executive of God's will, directed by intuitive judgment. You should never meet any challenge without taking your judgment with you. They accomplish together, and we, when we do this, we move through life with none of the turmoil that comes with materially based thoughts. All right? The Canaanites completely defeated, every last one of them. Oh, but the general escapes, or so it appears, and seeks hospitality. Sisera seeks hospitality from Jael. And you see, it takes more than just an enthusiastic will to get rid of the Philistines. It takes shifting our focus from the whole focus of the mind from materiality through to spirituality by eliminating the intellect. You remember that when he's sleeping in her tent, she drives a tent peg through his temples. That's symbolic of saying intellect is no longer in charge. And that is the thing that finally defeats the Canaanites, because you have to get the general, the one that's like the firstborn of the Canaanites. All right, so all three, Deborah, Barak, and Jael, managed to succeed by getting through, eliminating that control that the intellect has, and going to that inner place in the center of their being. Okay, so if you have questions about Deborah, write them down. The next judge that we talked about was Gideon. Gideon is truly a charming character. Oh, I forgot to mention about Deborah. Let me just add something to what I said about Deborah, because there is mention of Megiddo, which it translates as Armageddon. There is a battle of Megiddo, and that's when you maintain, when you are true to your spiritual nature, as demonstrated by Deborah, by Barak, and by Jael, then all of the limited thoughts are transformed. All those materialistic thoughts, focus, Canaanites, are destroyed at the Battle of Megiddo. So, and there's no battle. It's just that the intellect becomes subservient rather than in charge. Okay, so Megiddo, Armageddon, is a place of spiritual transformation. Okay, so now we'll go on to Gideon, the tree feller, the one that represents denial. And you remember when he is first called to his task, which is to defeat the Midianites, inner conflict. He has all these materialistic concerns. I'm too weak. I'm from a tribe that is weak, and I'm the smallest one in my tribe. All right, so concern about that. And he's concerned about food and what the name of this angel is so he can offer the angel some food. He doesn't know it's an angel. But when he makes an offering, as he was instructed to do, then he recognizes the angel as Jehovah, the Lord of his own being. And he received this inspired thought that says, I can do this task because God is with me. Okay, if you understand that God is always with you, then there is nothing to be afraid of. And so Gideon is charged with this very difficult task of overcoming the Midianites. And what he does is he sends out messages all over and ends up with 32,000 men to help him fight this battle. 32,000. And the Lord says, you don't need more, you need less. All right. You can heap up affirmations all you want, but here denial is needed. That is, take back the power that you have given to these contentious thoughts. So, and he's given the criteria. He's told, so everybody who's afraid, send them home. All right, so that gets rid of 22,000 of them, but there's still 1,000 that are left. No, that's not right, 10,000. Anyway, and the second test is how they take water. Now, water here is about cleansing. That's the power of denial, it's the power of letting go. So if they lap the water like dogs, directly, and fully and wholly, then they are chosen because they're going in for total denial. Whereas the ones that are kneeling down and they have to stay home. And so he pares it down to 300. And so that 300 is a very important number because it emphasizes that within us we have everything we need on the level of spirit, on the level of soul or mind with a small m, and body. Everything we need within us to defeat these Midianites. How can there be any conflict if spirit, soul, and body are all cleansed and functioning in harmony? And so, because that purified consciousness is now established, he has a very clear strategy for defeating the Midianites. Simply speak the word of truth. All right, so what does he do? He has trumpets, he has shouting, he has a sword, all those things. A sword cuts away the error beliefs. The trumpet and the shouting, what happens is it totally confuses the Midianites, and there's this turmoil. They're all frightened, and then they use their torches. The torches light the way down to the Midianites, and they all flee. Whenever we turn on the light inside, whenever we go into that silence and light comes forth, all those Midianites that are in our subconscious have to leave, and they destroy themselves in their confusion. Interesting story there. And so I forgot to mention the dream, but before he starts his battle against the Midianites, he goes down into their camp and he hears a man describing a dream, and he realizes that the work is already done. All right, that they already know it, and he already knows it, and so he's supported by that discriminating judgment, and he divides his men into 100 each. So God is present as spirit, God is present as soul, God is present as body, and all together they descend, and the Midianites flee. Okay. So we could say then that through the power of the word, we practice denial. All right? So we can say, as Myrtle Fillmore did, I do not inherit sickness. Any place that you have given power to, you can always deny that. If you say, I'm a child of God, I do not inherit sickness. What if yours is about worthiness? You say, I am worthy to do this task. I am a child of God. I release all feelings of unworthiness. Do you see? Whatever your challenge is, whatever is preventing you from meeting it with the power and presence within you, then you use that power of denial. Very important to acknowledge that you have the power, you have given power to something other than God, and you have the power to take it back. Okay, that's an important message. And of course, strife and contention within destroy each other. There are other examples in the Old Testament where that happens. Okay, so if you have questions about Gideon, write those down. And I'm going to move on to Jephthah, which is an unusual story. He is a very unlikely leader. He's a warrior. He was born of a harlot, and and actually, interestingly, in Jesus' lineage, Rahab, the harlot, is part of it. And so no matter what the obstacle is, and that was an obstacle. He was rejected by his brothers, who decided they were going to take his inheritance. And no matter what the obstacles are, they can be overcome with spiritual judgment. And he represents the persistent. He is very persistent, and that carries him to confidence. He makes a deal. He says, yeah, okay, I'll come back, but you have to make me in charge. Spiritual judgment must be in charge. And through acknowledging God as the leader, that opens the door to freedom. Jephthah means opening to freedom. He is delivered in freedom. Now, he defeats the Ammonites. Now, Ammonites, careless, disorderly thoughts, no sense of discernment. You accept this and that. It's kind of an eclectic state of mind where you take in everything kind of indiscriminately. And so what allows him to take on the Ammonites? They are completely subdued by the notion of spirit being in charge. It's like if you can really establish yourself and say, I am in charge, then all those indiscriminate and disorderly thoughts just seem to go away. He has a very easy time defeating the Ammonites. He is one that surrenders that need for personal status and glory and that, and he's really able to surrender. He surrenders his daughter. That's completely surrendering your faculty of love. Completely surrendering his last remaining connection to worldly consciousness. And when we surrender our faculty of love to God, as he did, then that is a virgin consciousness. That is the Christ. Okay? And so there is a complete commitment to things of spirit. Then come along the Ephraimites. All right, this is again that personal will tries to get back in charge and displace spiritual judgment. Willful thoughts, but I want to be in charge. How come you left me out? I'm worthy. They're complaining that Jephthah did not call on them. And when he went against the Ammonites. And so they have that discussion about why that occurred. And so how does he defeat the Ephraimites? It's really interesting. We get a lot of insights into how to deal with all these different phases of human consciousness. He goes to Gilead. He has the people gather together in Gilead. That is the mound of witness. That is that steadfast place in the silence. And that is what keeps the personal will from that high place in consciousness. And so as they try to cross the Jordan, they're defeated. You remember, it's how they pronounce. They try to pretend that they're really from where they are, and if he asks them where they're from, they can't pronounce the S. So it's very funny, but that is the key to being steadfast in that place in consciousness, which is the mound of witness, that place from where you witness everything. There's no battles. It's really fascinating to see that there's no fighting here when battles are spiritually won. Okay, then, so Samson. Samson, like Samuel, has that special birth. Not quite the same. Samson's mother has no name. She is the wife of Manoah, and so she represents a soul, being feminine, that is stationed in that place of rest. Her husband, Manoah, stationed in that place of rest within. And so she has the vision that she's going to have a child, and she has been barren. All right. And so she goes and tells her husband, and he wants to see the man of God or the angel. He doesn't know. He wants to know what it is. He wants to know, well, what are we going to do with the child and how are we supposed to raise it? These are all questions of the intellect, the man representing the intellect. All right. And so she is only told 3 things. No strong drink. Don't cut his hair. And the third thing was, what is the third thing? It's escaping my mind right now. No strong drink. It will come to me. Anyway, he violates, oh yes, and no dead things. Do not go touch anything dead. He violates, Samson, all of these things. He's aware of his birth. He's been told. He's a Nazarite. He represents spiritual strength. And so he decides to marry a Philistine. Parents say not such a good idea. But he does it anyway. And I think it's interesting that the scripture says that his parents did not know it was from the Lord that he should go and marry this Philistine. Perhaps thinking that was a way to get into the Philistines and defeat them from within themselves. Who knows? That's a good possibility. And so on the way, a lion threatens him and he kills the lion. All right, so we have the kind of inner strength to defeat even some huge challenge. And so on his way home, that's when the violation comes, and he sees honey growing out of the carcass, and he scrapes some off and takes it home to his parents. But there is a message here that even out of some challenge, really something dead comes something sweet. Something bitter results in something sweet. And that can happen. But he lies to his parents. He doesn't tell his parents where the honey came from. Okay. It came from that dead lion that I killed. Oh, yes. Okay. So then we have the feast. Okay. So here comes the strong drink. And the reason that Samson or any of us is drawn out of that spiritual nature is that our lives are not fulfilled, just this constant seeking for more experiences. It's a kind of the restlessness of the seeker that is Samson. None of these things are fulfilling to him. He had to lie to his parents about the honey. The honey was a good thing. It came out of a bitter experience. But now this Philistine wife, she is tricked. She is tricked into giving up the answer to the riddle. And he is enraged, and so he does some more killing, and goes back and finds out that they've given away his wife, and yes, they've given her away to another man, the groomsman, one of the groomsmen, his best man. So he retaliates. Human consciousness wants to retaliate. And he thinks, what I'll do is I'll just burn their fields. I'll just burn their entire crop. And he thinks that that's going to be the end of it. Fire also a symbol of purification, very much like the water was in the story of Gideon. Fire, a purification. Think, I could just burn everything, the fruits of all of this. But guess what? His wife, being a Philistine, and her father, they get burned in the process. So that was not the end of it. The foxes representing those materialistic, kind of subtle, calculating sorts of thoughts need to be purified out. And there's 300 of them. Okay, so that doesn't work. And even so, the wedding has not brought fulfillment. All right, the wedding, the union between a Philistine and an Israelite. Okay, so he flees, and he manages, and they're chasing him, and he manages to kill 1,000 men with the jawbone of an ass. We can use whatever is at hand to meet the present challenge. Yeah, you just happen to find it there. And he's exhausted from all of this. When we are constantly seeking fulfillment, it's exhausting. The fulfillment is already here. And right where he is, he says, I am thirsty, just like Jesus said on the cross. And what happens? Instantly, water comes up out of the rock. All you have to do is ask. It is already there, all the needs that you could possibly have. Okay. Well, the story goes on. Perhaps I don't need to tell you every detail again. But the next big incident is Delilah. A well-known story, because she is the one that leads to his capture. She represents the subtlest, most deceptive part of our nature, because she does everything. She does her little deception in the name of love. Samson, if you love me, you'll tell me the source of your strength. Now, he is so blinded by her deception, by his own infatuation with her, he doesn't even get the warning signs. 3 times he's told her the wrong thing, and she sees, he can break the bonds of anything. He has the strength. And the 4th time she says, if you love me, you will give me your secret. And so he tells her. But it's not really, again, it's not the hair. The hair is the symbol of that life force, because hair grows very fast. And so, as a result, he is captured. He is blinded to the truth. He's imprisoned in his own limited consciousness. He's blinded, and his work, he's put in prison, so he has what appears to be hard labor. And this is in this temple of Dagon. Well, he's there for so long that his hair starts to grow back. And so he becomes conscious of his strength again and calls upon God for deliverance, which is granted. Give me the strength, put me between these pillars, and he pulls down the whole temple. Now those Philistines come back. Samuel has to deal with them too. But this is step one. His job was only to begin to defeat the Philistines. I'm going to pause for a moment and see if there's any questions. I think we're at 8 o'clock, just about. And the real question is to identify within yourself what the Ammonites are for you, what the Philistines are within you, what the Midianites, which of these particular limitations of human consciousness is holding you back. And Charles Fillmore says that with spiritual judgment, that is judgment, it's a foundational faculty, one that Jesus called upon in his healing, represented by the disciple James. Okay. This is an opportunity when you see clearly. The intellect cannot comprehend everything. But seeing from that spiritual level, you have spiritual judgment, and you can say yes or no. This idea, I have to look at this. We have to take an inventory of all of those aspects of error belief or beliefs in limitations, belief in, what are some of those? Unworthiness might be one. One like, all thoughts that are of the ego, feelings of superiority or inferiority. The thoughts that some things are not doable, that there are some diseases that God cannot heal, that there are some challenges that might be too much for God and I might have to get in there and do it myself. These are all thoughts that limit us. And so consider that. I once asked a class if they thought there was anything that was incurable. And people actually raised their hands and said, yes, they thought some things were incurable. Unity was founded on the notion that there is no incurable disease. That was one of Myrtle Fillmore's error thoughts that got transformed into there is no such thing as an incurable disease. I am a child of God, and therefore I do not inherit sickness. And so what we can do is sort through, take an inventory in consciousness, and write down all the beliefs that we have uncovered. We may not have uncovered them all. But if you're stuck in a particular place, then there's a reason for being stuck, and that lies in the subconscious, which is either a thought or a feeling or the combination of the two that is short-circuiting your nervous system. And the solution, go into the silence and allow that presence of God to work in and through you and dissolve all of that. You do not use effort in that process. It is effortless from that particular place. And so when you're meeting a challenge, are you like Gideon and you heap up a mountain of affirmations or denials or what? It's very interesting the kinds of patterns that we have developed in order to meet the challenges that come to us. And it's largely a dysfunctional pattern. And it is ever so much easier for energy to come into form than it is to change form back into energy. It takes an infusion of energy from the source to dissolve those patterns that have short-circuited our whole energy field. Okay? I am 816-301-6304 for questions, comments, anything to do with the faculty of judgment. Next to faith, judgment is probably second, because first we have to have faith to perceive the presence of God. Faith is the perceiving power of the mind. Right? How can we form and shape substance if we can't perceive that it's there? Okay. And next comes, so we're aware of that substance, then we have to develop the discrimination as to what we want to form and shape. All right, we have to be discriminating. We don't want to take in anything, and we don't want to just produce any old kind of life. We don't want to have conditions that are unpleasant and uncomfortable and challenging. We don't want that. And finally, it is the connection to the faculty of love. You know, first we decide what kind of what we want to do with that substance to bring it forth in outer form, and to do the work we make the connection. Love is the unifying power of the mind. We become one with the source, and that is the solution to dissolving the pieces of human consciousness that have been limiting us. So I'll ask you first, Linda, is there something that is unclear or...
When you were talking about Samuel, you said, go within and listen for deliverance. So is that the same as praying? Or
yes.
Or...
Yes. Silence. You see, we're so accustomed. For you out there, she asked me about, is prayer the same as going within? And in Unity, Charles Fillmore knew this, that prayer is not about words. Okay, it is not about words. We are so used to saying our prayers. You know, we go very quickly to affirming and that. But unless we have made that connection to the source, which is in the silence, that is the essence of prayer. That silence moving in and through us is the prayer. That's how we call to God. We go into the silence and it brings forth what is necessary, all right? Wisdom. It brings forth guidance. Our first prayer is always for illumination, and it is not words. You will not get a billboard that says, turn left, turn right. Do this, do that. Rocco Errico's book, Setting a Trap for God. This is the essence of prayer. You go within and you become still and know. Become still and know. And what do you know? I am. Okay? That is the affirmation. And if you know I am, you don't have a problem saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The I of me is the way, the truth, and the life. The I of me is the resurrection and the life. The I of me is the good shepherd. All right, and so on. The I of me, those I am statements that are found in John, are only true from the silence. If you go around, you're in the grocery store and you say, I am the resurrection and the life, they'll say, maybe you would like to see a psychiatrist. Okay? In human consciousness, you see, we're in the ego. And so in the silence, our affirmations are the product of our experience there. Okay? That is that we experience the reality and then we affirm, I am. That's why when you say I am, you never want to say I am something that is not a characteristic of God. All right? Because God is not poor, God is not sick, God is not stupid, or whatever names you think of yourself. God is. And that Ark of the Covenant, that agreement, the covenant between the Father and the Son, between God and the image likeness, which we call the Son or the Christ, that is our nature. And Jesus emphasizes, and this really differentiates unity from other aspects of Christianity. There are a lot of different denominations that call itself Christian, but the unique feature of unity is this mystical connection. I and the Father are one. I and God are one. I am all that God is. I have inherited all. I am heir, joint heir with Jesus Christ to all that the Father has. Okay, that comes from experiencing the silence. So, the difference between unity and all others, unity was not started as a denomination. It was started as the basic, what Charles Fillmore called primitive Christianity, that died out about 300 years after Jesus ascended, but did last through the disciples. But then, starting when churches began to be built, it was like people forgot the truth that God is spirit. Number one, the nature of God and our relationship to God. That is what is different. That is how unity is different from the other, I don't want to say other denominations, because unity in essence is not a denomination. It, in some people's eyes, has become that. But its basis was that mystical experience of Myrtle Fillmore, of walking into a lecture thinking she was going to die of an incurable disease that she'd inherited from her parents, and she walks out knowing she's a child of God. It was that experience and the work in the silence which allowed unity to emerge as a global healing ministry. So if anyone asks you, how is unity different from, Methodism or Presbyterian or Catholic or all of these other things, we go direct to God, knowing that God and I are one and the same. The I of me is God. Not all of God, but the I of me is God. And I am all that God is. And I have access to the riches of the kingdom. Okay, and we hear that usually on Sunday, And then we go out and we act as though we had never heard that. Because we have to re-educate the mind by going within and experiencing that silent place. That's how we find it out. So prayer is first silence and then affirmation from that place of silence. Good question, because a lot of people still think that prayer is petition. It's asking God for something. And the thing is that we're so busy trying to let God know what we want that we cannot become still. Set that trap. You can feel how still you have to be. A trap. The trap has to be open. We have to be open to that still small voice. It's still and it's very subtle. And it comes through as a feeling, which your brain can then interpret as turn right and turn left, but it's not a billboard. Yeah. Interesting comment I found as I was going through some of Myrtle's letters. Oh, okay. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Eleanor. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm enjoying this discussion, especially the segue into prayer and the silence that Linda started here.
Yes.
What came to my mind is that whole story with Jesus at the well when they're going to stone the women, and he says, "Let he who is without fault cast the first stone." And to me, that kind of epitomizes this whole series that you're doing on judgment, coming from one place and coming from the other. It's very clearly stated that the human consciousness of those that were going to stone the woman comes from the human element, but in the Christ nature, in the Christ self, where Jesus is speaking from, he discerns that very clearly. It's a great lesson that he who was without a fault cast the first stone, and what happens? They all, one by one, leave the scene. But I think it really kind of is a good, what comes to me, it's really a good summary of all these stories that you've been focusing on judgment with the judges. It's very, very good. On this conversation about prayer, can you please comment on in Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, pray without ceasing?
Right. Okay. Praying without ceasing. Many have interpreted that to be like down on your knees saying prayers. Not at all. In fact, it's great that you asked that, because last night I found a quote from Myrtle Fillmore. This is from, I think it was from Gatlin's 50 Years of Unity, where she said, or maybe it was from Healing Letters. In any case, she said, she talks about how how this wonderful truth meant everything to her, and she could not communicate that except by being it and living it. So she felt that the only way to effectively communicate that sense of being the Christ was to be the example, so that when people came into her presence, they felt that. And she actually is an example of one who became the Christ. And she not only became the Christ, but all of her thinking and her decisions and her actions came from that source. And that is my understanding of praying without ceasing, being in a consciousness of that silent place, no matter where you are or what you're doing. And I'm open to any comments about that, because that's what we're all here to do. That's why we go into the silence. We visit there. Each day we visit there. But eventually a time comes when the balance between the outer pulls and the inner knowing has shifted, and we become more in tune with the inner than with the outer. And eventually it is like totally shifted, so that we live totally. We think, our attitudes, our decisions, our actions, that would be praying without ceasing. And so we're used to interpreting everything kind of literally in the Bible, unfortunately. And that is something that people cannot possibly understand without the experience. The experience is self-validating. But without the experience, it will be questioned. Is that?
And that's why I guess Charles Fillmore, I like what Charles Fillmore says, prayer is conscious union with God.
Yes.
And so what you're saying is Myrtle experienced conscious union with God. Jesus, when he was talking to those to the people there, telling them go and sin no more, he was speaking because he had that conscious union with God. You make a good point about being the example and being it rather than speaking it, because what we see in overall in evangelism and so forth is all the speaking, and saying and talking, and no one really has ever said, let's be still. It'd be interesting if one of the evangelists for 1 hour in the evening would just say, let us now just be still and go into the silence. What might happen?
Yeah.
So we're really all about words.
Exactly. And words are nothing but symbols. And
I like that.
Words are symbols. And so we mistake the map for the territory, right? I can give you a map of Hawaii, but that doesn't put you in Hawaii. Okay? I can tell you about prayer and silence, but that doesn't put you in the silence. All right? And so what Charles Fillmore said is that the churches, he's pretty hard on the churches. He said that through their doctrine, through their dogma, through their rituals, they have left the skeleton of spiritual power, but no substance, which is why we are not, as a whole, able to heal, cast out demons, raise the dead, and all the things that Jesus commissioned us to do. Charles, too, was, I would say, he represents the intellect in unity, and following Myrtle's example, he was a strong advocate of the silence. And not only that, but Rosemary, his granddaughter, remembers how when she was little, the kids would say, what's your grandfather doing? It looks like he's going to sleep. And she said, oh no, he's going into the silence. And when there was some appearance of illness, she'd say, she would say, no, we don't go to doctors. We just call Grandpa. and he prays. So there's that whole sense. And Charles's role, amazingly, was to develop a science. He knew that prayer was a science. And we could call it the science of being if we wanted to. But it's according to the principle of non-resistance. You follow this law. It's so simple. And he talks about how people put all this effort into trying to get into the silence, which it works against it and it keeps you up. He goes in, he elaborately talks about the law of going into the quiet, and then how the 12 powers become active and serve as the channels to express it. It's an elaborate science, but it has absolutely nothing but theory without the experience. And that's why Myrtle says this too, that even as a child, she was able, because of her mystical experiences as a child, she had that natural ability of metaphysical interpretation. And she read the Bible, and she knew about the well of salvation. And so when she saw a well in a neighboring yard, she asked them if that was the well of salvation. And they laughed at her and thought, what a funny little girl. But my experience too was, without the experience of silence, I never would have understood the Bible. So it's like clear vision. It gives you a sense of clear judgment and an ability to understand what would otherwise be pure theory.
And that's where the two powers of will and understanding come in.
Yes, perfect. Right, to be willing. It's a willingness to let go of what has always been your security and your understanding, and being open to having that presence and power come through you as wisdom. Also, you were talking about the Samaritan woman, but the woman at the well, she's having that kind of theological discussion with Jesus, and she says, Jesus says, God is spirit. And in some Bibles it says a spirit. Now, God is not a spirit. God is spirit, and we worship God in spirit. That means silence, and truth, which means affirmation. And so there are so many passages in the New Testament. Be still, well, that's Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am. But Jesus says, go into the inner chamber, close the door, pray to your Father in secret, and you will have your reward openly. That's somewhat paraphrased there. And seek ye first the kingdom of God. Go within first, knowing that everything else will be added. That is very hard for anyone to comprehend unless they have had even a little taste of that inner experience of silence. But you begin to trust it.
We could say that the basic fundamental foundation of Jesus' teaching is the silence.
Absolutely. The rest of it, Eric Butterworth uses the analogy of saying Jesus came to point the way, and we worship the pointer. That's what a lot of Christian churches do. They worship Jesus, but they don't. It's like, it reminds me of the people who say they love unity. Well, what is unity? It's a teaching, And so, yes, Jesus, the basis for everything is the consciousness of the Christ. And how do we gain that? By going within and experiencing it. It's been there from the beginning. It will always be there. But without a conscious recognition of it, acknowledgement of it, and drawing from it, it can't produce anything in an outer way. You get a whole new light on these things. And actually, every time I go through the Judges, I get a little more, from it, just from reading the stories. But you come to appreciate those foundational faculties as those channels, faith, and Andrew, his brother, Peter's brother, strength, that persistence that allows you to accomplish, and then judgment. So important. Judgment is not always judgmental. It's only judgmental when we use it in a human way. But judgment, to know the difference between the sheep and the goats and the errors and the truth, that is how we come to use judgment, but we can only get that perspective from the silence.
One of the strong characteristics of traditional Christianity is the whole notion of Judgment Day. Can you comment on that?
Oh, yes. Every day is Judgment Day. And Judgment Day, it's not hell in eternity, as some would have it, but it is, and Charles Fillmore addressed this, by each day he would review the decisions that he had made. He would review if any sort of disharmony had occurred during the course of his day, and he would release that. He would use his faculty of judgment to say, start fresh the next day. And so every day is Judgment Day. Every day we have chosen to do this or do that, or say this or not say this. We make those decisions. Judgment's all about making decisions, which is why you can't turn it over to some authority, so that at the end of the day, it's where that expression comes from, I'm convinced, that at the end of the day, you can review it and then say, oh yeah, I made that decision and I made that decision. And those seem to be life-supporting decisions. And I decided to say this, and maybe I said it in a way that sounded judgmental. And so then you have a chance to release what you see as poor judgments from your day. That's Judgment Day. It's not some point in time. It's using your faculty of judgment to kind of clean the slate each day.
Thank you. Very, very good. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate your comments and your feedback, and I appreciate this whole series. It's very, very good.
Oh, well, thank you.
And Linda got a good question going. I want to thank Linda for the question.
Yes.
Came out of my shell on the last day.
She came out of her shell on the last day, she says. Well, thanks, Bob. Appreciate the call.
Okay, good night.
Good night. Okay. And I want to thank all of you who have been participating and asking questions and also supporting the new foundation with your love offerings. The next class, I'm pretty sure, do check the website though, will be a Unity History, what I call the inside story, because the development of Unity came from the silence. It was revealed out of the silence. And so I'm going to take a couple of weeks to review that. And just keep your eye on the website, either Mark's or mine, and I will have handouts prepared for my website. And again, I thank you. It's been fun. It's been exciting. I've had a chance to go through some old weekly Unities for material for this Unity History class. I was debating between that and a class on the prophets, but I think I will save the prophets for as for the next class, because it's very appropriate at Christmas time. It's appropriate anytime. We're all prophets. We're all our own prophets. Charles Fillmore said, in fact, that there's no difference between us today and the prophets of old, that we are capable, completely capable of giving forth prophecies and being the mouthpiece of God. So anyway, I could go on and on and on once I get going, but I will bring tonight to a close, and I'll just ask you to close your eyes for a moment and be still and remember that we have access to that realm from where good judgment comes. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to weigh our options. We go within, tap the source, and follow the guidance. And we all give thanks for celebrating this foundational faculty upon which so much of the conditions of our life depends. And we say, thank you, God. Amen. If you would like to support New Foundation Unity with your love offerings, I invite you to hold them in your hands right now and bless them, knowing that the source is infinite, infinite abundance. It is the Father's good pleasure to give us the kingdom. And as we send our gifts forth, we bless them with our offertory statement. Divine love, through me, blesses and multiplies all the good I give and all the good I receive. And so I'll see you in a few weeks. I'll give you the date as soon as I know it. And God bless you. Have a wonderful evening.